and I'm very glad to report that I have managed to follow my own advice, and I have a lot of projects that don't look super scrappy, so I can show you some of the tips in action. Hi everyone, I'm Katrina Walser from Oliphant, and I'm a knitting teacher, designer and tech editor based in Sydney, Australia, and this is part 2 of my big 9-month stash down update. So if you haven't watched part 1, I would recommend doing that first. I will go over a little bit of why it's taken me 9 months to update you on what I've been making and some of the other projects that I've made. But this video is going to mostly focus on my stash down aspirations. I'll show you some of the projects that I made that were really just sort of purely stash busting. And so the way that I think about that is that they're things that I made because I wanted to, but also they were mostly informed by the yarn choice as opposed to the pattern choice. So hopefully it'll make more sense as I go. Now, if you're newish to the channel, thank you for coming back to watch a new video. And if you're an existing viewer, thank you very much for sticking around with me for this long through all of my very intermittent updates. But if you are newish, it's highly possible that you came in via the stash busting video because that's probably the most popular video that I've had. So it was about making projects from scraps that don't look scrappy. And I'm very glad to report that I have managed to follow my own advice, and I have a lot of projects that don't look super scrappy. And so I'm going to structure this video in the same way that I structured that one, and we'll use the same categories, so I can show you some of the tips in action. But also, if you haven't seen that video, I'll link to it up here just so you know what I'm even talking about. Okay, so the first tip that I gave in that video for using up your scraps was to hold yarn double. So I know this is a very common thing these days, especially holding a single strand of a wool or a cotton or just a main color with a mohair. But it's just not something that I've done a lot of until very recently. So all of the things that I've done in this category have actually been hair accessories. So the first 5 were scrunchies, and I don't have any of them anymore, but I'll try and flash some pictures of them up on the screen. And they were definitely an experiment in making scrunchies. I ended up settling on a design where you cast on at the bottom, you knit a tube up that's fairly short, and then you put an elastic into the middle and fold the cast on and the bind off together, and then you graft them shut. It makes a really seamless looking tube, but I'll try and find a tutorial for how to do that and put it in the description box down below. Oh, speaking of the description box, I forgot to mention that I'm not going to put links to all of the patterns and the yarns in this video down in the description box like I normally do, because there's just too many yarns to go over. But I'll put links to each of the individual project pages that I have on Ravelry into the description box, and you can find all the details you need in there. But if you have any questions, or if you ever want to ask anything about a particular pattern or yarn, definitely leave a comment down below and I will get back to it pretty quickly most of the time. So the scrunchies were all gifts. And after that, I wanted some hair accessories for myself, especially because I did an experiment in February to see if I could wear something knitted every day. And that doesn't sound like much of a stretch if you're from the Northern Hemisphere, but keep in mind I live in Sydney and February is the height of summer. So I thought it'd be a fun challenge, and I did manage to do it most days, but there were some days where it was just too hot to do even for my strappy summer singlet tops. So I decided I would make some hair accessories so I could use those on the really hot days. So the first one that I made was a hair bow. And this is the first time I'm going to say this, but I wouldn't recommend this pattern. So this is called Cottage Hair Accessories by Wool & Pine. And I have made several Wool & Pine patterns and I've really, really enjoyed them. And this one just annoyed me, mostly because she had pictures in the pattern listing that weren't actually in the pattern. And the reason that I bought the pattern was that there was a particular bow that I wanted to make, and there just weren't instructions for how to make it in the pattern. It turned out that she has instructions in the pattern for this bow part. And then she also has instructions for something she just calls a tie, which is this little hair tie scarfy thing that you can just tie into your hair. And in the pattern, listing, she had taken a picture of the two of them stacked together in someone's hair, but there's no instructions for how to actually do that in the pattern itself. And so it seems like it should be pretty easy to figure out how to put those things together, but it did still take a bit of effort to figure out how many stitches I should cast on for this small bow part of it so that it was in proportion to the tie bit. And so I was a little annoyed because if I was going to be figuring out that much of it, I would have just figured it out myself. But if you do want instructions for how to put them together, I think I listed it in my Ravelry page and you can get a link to where you can buy the pattern from there. But the yarn is gorgeous. It is from Gather Make Give, who used to be called Natural Yarn Co. And the colour is MacArthur, and then it's just held together with a strand of mohair. It's ridiculously oversized in the best way. And I don't have any good pictures of me wearing it, but my 6-year-old has definitely claimed it many times, and I have some nice pictures of it in her hair, so I'll try and include those here. The other thing that I made with yarn held double was this giant scrunchie. So I've been getting Instagram ads for a particular scrunchie company. She calls it a chouchou. My French is awful, but I think maybe that's how she pronounces it. And I figured I would just make one myself. And there was a tiny clip in a reel of her making them, and she was making them on a knitting machine. And so I realized that it's a tube, but it's a tube that's knit this way. So all of the other scrunchies that I had made, the tubes were knit sort of this way, but this one's knit sideways. So essentially it ended up just being like a big sock tube. And then I threaded some elastic into the inside and I grafted the ends together. And the yarn was, again, just a strand of bare mohair. And the neutral coloured yarn is a sock yarn from By Corolla Down Under, who does all of this gorgeous natural dyed yarn, but unfortunately she has stopped dyeing. But I'd done a lot of projects in her yarn, and so I'm glad to have something that I wear a lot, because I wore this almost every day between when I made it and when I got my hair cut. So I'm thinking I'll make a smaller size of it so that I can wear it when my hair's a bit shorter, because I really miss being able to wear this thing. So the next tip that I had in my sort of scrappy stash fussing video was to make things out of Colourwork, because that can use up more scraps out of your stash. And I counted brioche as Colourwork for those purposes. And so the two brioche items I've made were this beanie and this scarf for my daughter. So she'd been asking me for a while for a scarf, and she wanted it in pink, and I didn't have a lot of pinks. But then I went to the Australian Yarn Show in Canberra in March, and I won the speed knitting competition, which was pretty hilarious. I've had people tell me that I'm quick when I knit, and I've never been entirely sure how quick I am, or like if I'm actually quick, or if people are just sort of like being nice. And so I joined the speedy competition and I won. So I guess I am a little on the faster side at the very least. But the prize for winning the competition was very, very generous. So it was this giant bundle of yarn as well as some notions. And two of the skeins were one from Bellevue Park. And they make this gorgeous wool. And this was a 10-ply, but I can't seem to find it on their website. So I don't know if it was just a sort of one-off that they had been experimenting with. But yes, this lighter pink is a 10-ply wool. And then the variegated colour is from Cowcat Creations. And so Regan is a designer in Melbourne, I think. But she dyed a skein of wool, I think just for fun, more or less. And so she tells me that the base is 8-ply. And it's the machine washable DK from Nundle. So these two colours came out really nicely together. I like how they worked out in the scarf, because it makes it this really cool reversible pattern. And so this was 2-colour brioche flat, and this was 2-colour brioche in the round. I think this is the first time I've knit 2-colour brioche in the round, but it turned out that it was okay. It wasn't too tricky. It's much more straightforward than it is when you knit it flat. And I wasn't too sure if mixing 8-ply and 10-ply would be okay, but it's worked out fine. Amelia's 6, so she can't tell the difference. She just likes their pink and she wears them pretty often. So the next tip that I had was to make small things, which basically means try and find projects for your biggest skeins of leftovers. So the first project that I made was a gift. I don't have it on me, but I went to the Philippines in January with my family to celebrate my godmother's 70th birthday. And so I thought it would be good to make her something for her 70th. And so I settled on a scarf. So I had about 90 grams left of a skein of Pearl Soho Sweetgrass, and it's a cotton alpaca mix. And so I thought that would be nice because it might be a bit lighter. Given that she's in the Philippines, she doesn't really need a heavy scarf. And I made a really lacy scarf out of it. So it's a pattern that I've made before. It's called the Jaspy Shawl by Kika Gullion, but I figured out how to cut it essentially in half and make it into a scarf instead. And so what I did do with that though was that because I knew I only had 90 grams left, and the shawl tapers at both ends, so it begins from a point, it grows out to the main width, and then at the other end it shrinks back down again. And so what I did is that after I'd done the increases, I weighed how much yarn I had used in that triangle section, and then I kept that much aside out of the ball. And then I knit the straight section to use up the remaining amount, and then I knit the triangle using the stuff that I'd put aside, and that worked out really well. It also ended up being a really good length, so I think it ended up being about 180 centimeters long, which is a pretty good scarf length. The next 3 small things that I made were all the same pattern. So the default baby knit that I make these days is called Newborn Vertebrae, and it is by Kelly Van Niekerk. I've probably made a good 12 of these now, just for babies in my life and also for charities and things. And I had 3 different pretty good friends who were having babies in the last 9 months, so I made them one of these each. It's a very straightforward pattern. It's written for a 5-ply, but I usually knit it in 4-ply. So I made one in the same yarn as this, but just not held double with a mohair. And so it came out lovely and speckled, and that was for a little girl whose parents like a lot of colour. And then the second one I made out of West Yorkshire Spinners Bo Peep 4-ply, and that was in a grey colour. So funnily enough, it was for the original recipient's cousin, but his parents like much more neutral colours, so I made it in the grey. And I actually altered this one to have a double knit button band because I knew I was going to want a double knit button band on a cardigan I made for myself later on. And if you want more details about that, it's in the previous video. And so I wanted to experiment with double knit button bands because I'd never done one before. So I figured out how to change the button band in the Newborn Vertebrae pattern to use a double knit instead. And so that worked out quite nicely. It's very sophisticated looking. And so I think they like it, and because the baby's a couple months old now, so hopefully he's gotten some wear out of it. And the third one was one that I made for my cousin, and I cast it on while I was in Tasmania. It was a really good small knit for travel. And I also put the double knit button band on this one because I liked it enough on the first one that I tried that I thought I'd do it for this one too. I can't remember what these yarns are. I will put them up here on the screen, but the double knit does take up a lot more than I expected. And so I was going to make a pair of baby booties to go with the cardigan, but I sort of ran out of the grey. That's a good segue into the next segment, which is to try doing colour blocking if you want to use up the rest of your stash. So for the booties that I made to match the cardigan, the pattern was called the Colette Vintage Booties, and it's a new pattern to me, and it's really, really pretty. I like this little like tuck detail it has around the edges of the sole, and it was pretty easy to do. And so I used the yellow and the grey that I had used for the cardigan, but I ran out of the grey. So it ended up being a bit more colour blocky than I thought. I had to find a second grey that I could use to finish off the booties, but they turned out pretty nicely and the baby has worn them, so all's well that ends well. And then the second project that I have in this category is a pair of socks. So if you watched the last video, I was talking about my pattern, which is called Falling for Socks, and I wanted yet another pair of them. But this time I wanted to see what would happen if I made it stockinette instead of ribbed. So it's the same pattern, but just anywhere that there was 2x2 rib, except for in the cuff, I just changed it to be stockinette. And they do fit really well. So a lot of these were scraps that were leftovers from my Stella quilt blanket, which again, if you're wondering what that is, make sure you watch the previous video. And the main colour was from... I've forgotten the name of the dyer, but I'll put the details up here on screen. but I just found the colour hilarious because it's called Melted Bubble Bill. And if you're an Aussie kid from the 90s, you'll know that this is pretty on point with what this colour looks like. And so I just always found that quite hilarious. So these fit really nicely, and I'm glad I have yet another pair of hand knit socks. Okay, and then the next set of things I wanted to show you are charity knits. So I made a set of penguin jumpers. And these definitely fall more towards the scrappy category, given how stripy they are. But there is a bit of colour blocking in the top and the bottom here because the rib is in different colours to the rest of the body. There's a fourth one up here on this bunny. And my daughter saw the bunny with the jumper on, and now she definitely wants a bunny jumper, so I'll probably make her one later on. But these are for a charity called the Penguin Foundation, and quite a few years ago there was an oil spill and they needed to clean the penguins up, and then the penguins got cold, so they put jumpers on the penguins. And there was this giant charity drive to get people to send them jumpers. These days, thankfully, there haven't been any major oil spills, so the actual penguins don't need jumpers, but they still take donations and they put them on toy penguins to sell in the shop, and the funds all go towards the penguin charity. So the pattern, if you want to make some yourself, is knit flat, but I put some details in one of the Ravelry projects for how to adapt it to being in the round. I also have a set of beanies that I made for charity, and to be honest, I don't know which charity these are going to go to, but I feel like beanies are an easy thing to find a charity who needs them, so I will send them all off when I figure out who I'm going to send them to. These were all definitely very yarn driven. These two were the ones I did first, and I was having fun experimenting with this sort of swirly pattern with stockinette columns on a reverse stockinette background. And I'm actually quite happy with how this turned out. I did a bit of a deep dive into how to make this swirl very swirly, and I watched a really good video by Roxanne Richardson on how crown decreases work, so I'll link to that down below if you're also interested. But if you'd be interested at all in this pattern for next winter, please let me know because I'm very tempted to write it up. So this was in Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Bulky. And this one was a mystery bulky yarn that I've had in my stash for a very long time. They've ended up sort of like adult male size. And then the third one was just finishing off the dark green yarn. I just put stripes into this lighter green yarn. So it's Merino Magic Chunky for the lighter green. And this was just me freestyling a beanie. There's not much to say about it. It's a beanie. And then the last one I actually really like. So this was knit in 8-ply yarn, and it's more of a adult lady size, I'd say. It fits me pretty nicely. I like how much space there is in the top. And so it has a really thick double brim. And I was using it to finish off this light green yarn that I had in my stash. I don't remember what that was, but I'll put it up here on the screen. And then the rest of it is in some Bendigo Wool & Mills Classic. And I thought the colours went nicely together. So I just did that to stash bust. I'm sort of tempted to keep it, but I'll give it away and make one for myself if I want one. And then I have a Christmas knit that I made last December. So I made a Santa hat for my son. So I'd already made a set of these Santa hats a couple of years ago for myself and my husband and my daughter. So I needed one for Jonathan because he'd outgrown the one that I made him when he was a newborn. So this is a pattern called Festive Mood. It is fisherman's rib for the brim, but I actually just changed it into brioche because I find that a lot more comfortable to knit, and they're pretty much equivalent to each other. And then the top's just stockinette, and luckily I found a scrap of yarn in my stash that I had left over from the original beanies that I'd knit. So the colour is exactly the same, it's just the brim colour that's different. So the red is Lincraft Cozy Wool and the brim is Heirloom Alpaca. Alright, and then I have one project that definitely didn't make the non-scrappy cut. So here is a pair of socks that I made for my husband, and they look scrappy in a not great way, but he says he's happy with them, so that's okay. This is a pattern called Marooned. It's by Hunter Hammerson, and I had made a pair of socks like this for him previously from 4-ply yarn held double, and they came out really thick and chunky, and I didn't like them, but he wears them all the time because they keep his feet really warm in the winter. He wears them more like slippers, so he'll wear other socks inside of them. And so for Father's Day, I figured I'd knit him a second pair because the first one I'd had to put pretty chunky patches into the bottom of the foot where the yarn had worn out. And he was saying that they were becoming a bit uncomfortable. So I started making these, and I chose this color to begin with, and I figured I'd do some color blocking all the way down. But then I couldn't find any other yarn that sort of went nicely with this blue, and so I ended up with this purple, but then somehow the purple ended up sort of halfway down the heel and the line. Anyway, I don't love how the colors worked out. They look sort of scrappy to me, but he's happy enough with them. Unfortunately, they're a bit short, so I modeled these off of the previous socks that I'd made him, and I counted how many rows that I'd done in the old socks, but I think my gauge has just changed quite a bit, and so they're too short. So I may rip the toes back and then add a bit of length and redo them, because it is a cuff down sock. But it was a bit of a painful knit. Long story short, I did intarsia in the round, because the sock is mostly made out of 8-ply, but then for the heel and the ball of the foot, I wanted to hold it double with the 4-ply. So this light purple is called Bo Peep. It's by West Yorkshire Spinner, and I just happened to have some of the 8-ply and some of the 4-ply in my stash in exactly the same color, and so I figured if I held them together, hopefully it wouldn't ever blow out, because this yarn is so thick here on the bottom of the sole. But I didn't want it to be quite so thick on the top, so I only held the 4-ply for half of the round. That means you have to do intarsia in the round, which I don't want to go into too much detail about, but it's a bit of a painful process. So if I can be bothered, I will undo the toes and add a bit of length, but we'll see how we go. So those are all the scrappy projects that I've made. I didn't go into as much detail as I normally would in a regular podcast episode because I'm losing my light and you probably don't want to hear me talk anymore. But again, if you have any questions or want any more details, then please let me know. So going forward, the two whips that I have are my pinstripe top, which I was talking about in the last video. All I need to do with that is add the second sleeve and then we should be mostly done. And then I also have my Christmas stocking, which has been around for a long time. This is for my son. I was aiming to have it ready for him last Christmas and I didn't. So the last time you saw this, it was last November and I had just done the Colourwork portion. And so I've since added the heel and the toe and the cuff. And now all I have to do left is put the name in, and then also you put in an I-cord edging and make a I-cord loop so that you can actually hang it. And then I also sew a lining into it, just so it doesn't stretch out so much if you actually use it as a stocking. I'm going to have to watch an old podcast episode to figure out how I did that with the previous stockings because I don't remember. So we can find out together as I finish this off. So in terms of the actual stash down, my maths is a little all over the place for a couple of different reasons. So as far as I can tell, since last November, I've definitely knit 8,742 meters worth of yarn, but I didn't count this yarn that I was using for this giant blanket right here. So I'm pretty sure I can comfortably say that I've knit at least 10 kilometers of yarn in the last 9 months, but a lot of it didn't come from stash. So what have I added to my stash in the last 9 months? I added a bunch of yarn that was given to me to make patterns. I've also added some yarn that I just bought because I felt like it, and I haven't used it yet, so I won't talk about it until I've actually used it. But there's definitely more yarn sitting in my stash, mostly because I went on a couple of different holidays and I went to some yarn festivals, and those are my sort of Achilles heel when it comes to buying yarn. I also added a lot of yarn as I finished this blanket. So if you want more details about the blanket, then definitely go watch the previous video. But basically, when I did my big audit of my stash, maybe about 18 months ago, I didn't count any of the yarn that I had set aside for this blanket. So as I finished different bits of the blanket, I had more leftovers than I thought I would, and I ended up putting them back into my stash. So from a stash counting perspective, even though I was using up yarn, I was only adding to my stash as I used this yarn up because I was adding the leftovers in. So those are all the main sources of yarn that I've added. And so as far as I can tell, I've added about 7,610 meters since last November. So when all said and done, my stash hasn't changed much in terms of pure meters. So right now it's sitting at 29,576 meters, which is still a lot and which is not a very different number to what it was last November when I last updated you. So what I'm going to do is I do actually have a lot more yarn that I had set aside for this blanket because I ended up making it smaller than I originally planned. So just to get everything all sort of settled, I'm going to add all of that yarn into my stash, and then we're just going to count from there going forward. So once that's added in, I'm guessing that I'm going to pass the 30,000 meter line again, which is unfortunate, but at least we'll have a baseline that I can just go down from there. So that's my big update. You're all caught up now with all the stuff that I've been making, and hopefully I can make more regular podcast episodes from here on out. I can't promise how often that I'll do them, but I'll try at the very least to do them quarterly, just so we don't have 2 giant long episodes again. And that way I can keep you a bit more informed with what's been going on with my projects and my stash down and just my life in general. So if you've made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you very much. If you have liked this video, please hit the like button down below because it helps other people find the channel and the videos. And if you'd like to keep in touch and get further updates as I go with my stash down, then you can hit the subscribe button either down below in the box or here on the screen. And if you'd like to catch up with any previous podcast episodes or stash down episodes, there's a big playlist of them right here. But that's it for now, and until next time, I've been Kat from Oliphant Cat. Happy knitting!